I rise on behalf of New Zealand First to speak in favour of this bill. I would like to acknowledge that due to circumstances beyond our control, this is the first time we've had an opportunity to speak on this bill. And New Zealand First would like to take this opportunity to recognise the work done by the previous members of the Education and Select Committee and to make particular mention of the previous chair of that committee, the late Alan Peachy. I do note, however, that while I mention we have been absent for the progress of this bill up to this point, as I listen here today, I am somewhat glad for small mercies. Mr. Speaker, the Royal Society of New Zealand has a proud history of encouraging, promoting and recognising excellence in the areas of science and technology. And it is with pleasure that we support a bill that expands the Society's objectives to include the advancement and promotion of the humanities in New Zealand society. I also note that the Society has a role in advising the government from time to time, and the New Zealand First Party welcomes anybody that can advise the government on how to be more human. I believe it is also worthy of note that this bill began its life outside of Parliament and was brought here after a full and robust internal consultation process by the Society themselves, and with the overwhelming majority support of the Society's fellows. I see no problem at all with the word fellows. Hence, I would assume the relative speed that the Select Committee has been able to address these amendments. And it is not the intention of New Zealand First, I wish to assure the Society and my colleagues, it is not our intention to impede its progress any further. Mr. Speaker, New Zealand First does wish to use this opportunity to recognise previous comments made in this House of the visionary way that the Royal Society sees economic potential for New Zealand through the bringing together of the best of our talent and the best of our brains once this bill is enacted. And I would like to close, Mr. Speaker, by quoting Mr. Garth Carnaby, the President of the Royal Society of New Zealand, and I quote, "For the first time, there will be an organisation in New Zealand that promotes excellence in research and scholarship across all disciplines and all areas of knowledge. New Zealand First supports this bill." Thank you.
Louise Upston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very proud to speak in the third reading of this bill. As a former member of the Education and Science Select Committee, this was a topic that we did some serious work on the committee, so it's nice to have it finally in the House for its third reading. But I do want to start by commending the Speaker from New Zealand First that preceded me. It would have been great to have heard more about New Zealand First's commitment to the Royal Society in New Zealand. We only got a glimpse of it then, so thank you for that, and I look forward to further contributions. I also want to just take a moment to pay tribute to the former chair of the Education and Science Select Committee, the late Alan Peachy. I think it's been very fitting also today to hear a contribution from the new Member of Parliament for Tamaki, Simon O'Connor. So in terms of this piece of legislation, I was a bit horrified, Mr. Speaker, to find that one of the opposition members was accusing this side of the House of not having a real understanding about the Royal Society. And I do want to correct one of the members opposite by saying that I had quite a lot of involvement on one particular project with the Royal Society when it was around the promotion of science in schools and a whole awards program that was put together to do exactly that. And I think that's one of the things that's really important in terms of the work that the Royal Society does. And so, Mr. Speaker, clearly this is an organisation that's been around for quite some time. We've had some of the history. I could go over that, Mr. Speaker, but I think we've covered that well. I could come back to that maybe a bit later in this third speaking reading. But for an organisation that's been around since 1867, it is incredibly important that the opportunity is taken to review the way it's structured, the organisation, the shape and form. And although, Mr. Speaker, there's obviously consensus in the House about passing this legislation, I do want to just bring to the House's attention that it wasn't all smooth sailing in the Select Committee, that we did actually have some submitters who were opposed to this, who were unhappy, Mr. Speaker, with the consultation that was undergone around this time. And I think it's important that we do recognise that a full democratic process should be undertaken in this instance, where a proper select committee scrutiny was provided, and there was definitely not full support from the submissives that appeared before us. And some of that was, I think, Mr Speaker, if you look back to when you have an organisation that has a number of branches involved and a New Zealand-wide organisation, sometimes what happens is there's some tension between the branches and the New Zealand-wide or the national organisation that has led to some tension, and it led to some very strongly worded submissions that were opposing this piece of legislation. So I do hope in the interim, given that there has been, quite a passage of time since it was first introduced, that those branches have managed to deal with the issues and complaints that they had at the time, and that they've been able to work with their New Zealand-wide organisation in overcoming their opposition. Because clearly, Mr Speaker, it wouldn't be healthy for the Royal Society of New Zealand, such an esteemed organisation, to have tension within its own branch structures. So I'm hoping with the passage of time, and I do say it has been quite lengthy, that there has been the ability for the Royal Society to mend those bridges and to resolve any of the issues that they had within their branches. And it's quite interesting because we talk about the fact that we do have broad agreement for this bill. And I'm actually looking, Mr Speaker, at some of the Hansard notes from Grant Robertson, who, of course, now is the Deputy Opposition Leader. And he spoke very strongly and used words about consensus and about collaboration in the House, which are all fantastic words, and they're good examples of when the House can work together incredibly well. But as those of us know who were in the 49th Parliament, and those who were interested in the bill following on the Members' Day order paper, actually it descended into quite a level of complaint and criticism. And if I was the Royal Society, Mr Speaker, I would be fairly annoyed at the amount of time that this bill actually took, due to the Labour opposition so vehemently opposed to the bill, of course, the voluntary student membership bill that followed behind it. So although Grant Robertson, who is the Member of Parliament in charge of this bill, talked about consensus and collaboration, it was absolutely anything but. And I've, given that we're talking about science, given that this is the Royal Society and their mandate, I thought I would, give evidence of some of that delay. And I'm now looking at some of the speeches in the committee stage, and it was interesting when we had discussions about the title. So, Mr Speaker, I know how many committee stages you have presided over and how you would appreciate that the title stage of a committee stage generally moves quite quickly. But instead we had the then member of the Local Government and Science Select Committee, David Shearer, who is, of course, now the leader of the opposition, speaking at quite some length about whether or not we should describe, define, go into some detail about the word "ah." And, Mr Speaker, lengthy description about "ah," and whether the word should be in there, whether it was clearly defined. And if we thought that that was riveting enough, we then moved on to a definition of "the." So for an organisation, for the Labour Party that now has the member that I refer to as their leader, it's a bit tragic if they have to spend so much time defining words like "ah" and "the." So then, of course, we did get on to some really chunky discussion, and that was then the definition of society. And I can tell you, Mr Speaker, if I was the Royal Society, I would have been highly insulted. It would have been an offence that members of the opposition took to this important piece of legislation to them with such frivolity, which with just absolutely no rhyme or reason, other than a clear intention to disturb the progress of the House, when it was a bill in the name of one of their own, which is quite staggering. And just to remind you, that person now is their deputy leader. So actually this side of the House does take science seriously, and it's great to be in the House with the Minister of Science and Innovation, the Honourable Stephen Joyce, of course, is also the Minister of Economic Development and Tertiary Education, which is a fantastic bundling of those important areas that, to this side of the House, are extremely important. So if we look at, and I'm speaking to this, Mr Speaker, because one of the Labour speakers had suggested that National isn't that interested in science. Well, that's absolute rot. And I want to give some examples of why we are interested. So if you look at the Primary Growth Partnership, investing almost $500 million in research and innovation in the primary and food sectors. And we've seen just in the last few weeks information out from Statistics New Zealand showing the level of exports growing and the growth in particular of the dairy sector. So research clearly into this area is vital. Today, Mr Speaker, in the House, we have seen in question time the debate around, or some questions around fracking and its use in geothermal energy. In my own electorate in Taupō, science and innovation is alive and well with the Clean Energy Centre, which of course is focusing on the development of further geothermal techniques, which is so important in terms of achieving our renewable targets. So the areas of tertiary education, economic development, science and innovation, they are so interwoven with this government's economic growth agenda. They form part of the 120-point economic development plan. And Mr Speaker, I could talk for 10 minutes alone in terms of what we're doing with the high-tech sectors. There's just so much information to cover with the Royal Society bill and the importance of science and making sure that we get it right. This side of the House is giving it the attention that it is due, Mr Speaker, so I'm proud to support this bill in its third reading.
I call Ian Lees-Galloway.
Mr Speaker.